We will begin Shabbos Daf Samach Gimel at the bottom of Daf Samach Beis, where the Gemara is in the middle of a discussion as to what the people of Yerushalayim had been guilty of that made them susceptible to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Then we will begin the next Mishnah, which will discuss two categories of devices to whether or not they may be worn in the street on Shabbos. We'll talk about weapons, and we'll talk about some type of strap that goes around the leg. Then the Gemara will discuss weapons more at length. The Gemara would want to know, will they exist in the days of Mashiach or not? And therefore, are they considered an ornament or not? The Gemara will then carry from there into a discussion about Talmidei Chachamim. We'll have Agadata as to the behavior of Talmidei Chachamim to each other, and how Talmidei Chachamim's behavior to each other makes the Kadosh Baruch Hu react to them. That will take us to a number of other statements of Agadata by the same people. Eventually, we'll get back to referring to the Mishnah. We will discuss what the devices in the Mishnah are, and explain how they are used, and that'll take us to another discussion about Hilchos Tumah and Tahara, and to when small things can be Mekabel Tumah, even if they're smaller than the requisite size. So let's go to the beginning of the Daf. We'll start at the bottom of Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara has just finished discussing what the women of Yerushalayim had been guilty of before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Now about the men. So the Gemara says that they were disgusting individuals, they were vile, and they will talk about immoral subjects in aloof terms. And they would say to each other, well, what type of meal did you have today? Meaning, what type of a woman were you with? Was it bread that was kneaded well or not kneaded well? Meaning, was she a Besura, was she a virgin or not? Was it light wine or dark wine? Meaning, was she fair-skinned or not? Was it a narrow couch that you sat on, or was it a wide couch? Meaning, was she skinny or was she fat? And did you eat your meal with a good friend or with a bad friend? Meaning, was she good looking or not? So the Gemara says all these things were referring to immorality, like we said before. Now the Gemara says another thing about the fragrance of Yerushalayim. We had mentioned that earlier. The Gemara says that they used to burn cinnamon tree logs for firewood. The fragrance would drift all throughout Eretz Yisrael. Then when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, all those cinnamon trees disappeared and they were gone. There was none left except for a tiny barley grain, which is now in the storehouses of one of the queens, which she uses to give herself a good smell, a good fragrance. Now we go to the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses two types of things which may or may not be worn in the street on Shabbos. They are weapons and armbands or leg bands. So first of all, the weapons, the list is a sword, a bow, a shield, or an alah, which the Gemara will define. It's a club or a spear. These are all the weapons. Now, what is halacha about them? It's a machlekes. Rabbi Eliezer says he's allowed to carry them in the street. They're ornaments, and the way that they're used is by carrying them. Therefore, it's an ornament. It's not a problem for a man to wear those in the street or carry them in the street. The Chachamim say, ornament! A weapon ain't no ornament. A weapon is a disgrace. And the proof that it's not an ornament is that when Mashiach will come, they will disappear, like it says, their swords will become plows, their spears will become pruners, and no nations will go to war against each other anymore. Okay, so that's a machlokes over Eliezer and the Chachamim, whether or not you consider weapons to be ornaments. Now we go to the second half, which is about something called the birus and kavalim. The Gemara will describe these as type of bands to go around the legs. So the Gemara says a birus you're allowed to wear in the street on Shabbos, and it is not mekabel tumah. Kavalim you are not allowed to wear in the street on Shabbos, and they are mekabel tumah. Okay. Let's go to the Gemara. First of all, what's in Allah? The Gemara says it's a type of a club with a spiky head. You will not want to get hit with that thing. Okay, now the machlokes. So we had a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, whether or not you can wear them in the street. The issue, the Gemara says, is whether or not they are ornaments. The Gemara expands on this with a brisa. Now we have two versions of the brisa. In the brisa, the Chachamim say to Rabbi Eliezer, if you're right that they're ornaments, how come in the days of Mashiach they will be eliminated? So according to the first version of the brisa, Rabbi Eliezer said, simple, because they aren't going to be needed anymore. There won't be any more wars, so there won't be any need for weapons, but they will still be an ornament. According to the second version of the brisa, Rabbi Eliezer said they won't disappear. They will still be needed. What do you mean? The pasuk says that they'll become plows and all those things. All those psukim with those fantastic prophecies are not talking about Mashiach's times. Those are all talking about Olam Haba, which is a different world. Mashiach's times, everything will be normal, and there will be war and weapons and all that stuff. Now, the Gemara says this is actually machlokes between Shmuel and Rabbi Abba. This version of the brisa that Rabbi Eliezer holds that there will be war supports Shmuel, who holds that the days of Mashiach will be just like today's days. The only difference will be that the Jews will not be subservient to the Goyim, and they will have a Beis Hamikdash and Yerushalayim. According to Chia Bar Abba, all those nevuahs which promised wonderful things that seem to be beyond the normal, all those are talking about the days of Mashiach. It's not talking about some distant time. Shmuel says they're all referring to Oyam Haba, and Mashiach will be pretty similar to our current world. Chia Bar Abba says they're all talking about Mashiach's times, and if you don't know what Oyam Haba is like, nobody has seen it, no Navi, no prophecy ever discusses it. Now, according to the version of Rabbi Eliezer that he says there will be war, that supports Shmuel. According to the other version, it is against Shmuel, it's like Chia Bar Abba. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me that according to the first version, Rabbi Eliezer said you won't need them because there won't be war. But hold on a second. The Gemara says you said that they're an adornment. If they're an adornment, you should still have them. They're adorning for the men, even if there's no war. So Abaye answers it's only an adornment because men use it to fight, and therefore it shows their strength, it shows their virility. But if there won't be war anymore, then there won't be an adornment anymore. Their adorning quality will disappear. Okay, now the Gemara says that we have a proof that Rabbi Eliezer is right, that they're really an adornment. A passing in Tehillim, it says, Chagar, Charbachal, Yarech, Gibor, Hoidcha, V'aderecha, put your sword on your thigh, strong one, it's your glory, it's your splendor. So Gemara said, you see, your sword is a glory and splendor, you see that it's an adornment. So Rav Kahana said to Mar, son of Rav Huna, what are you talking about? That's not talking about swords, that's talking about the Torah. Not meant to be taken literally. So Gemara says, okay, that's a drush, but the Pashup Pshat is that it's talking about sword, and the simple pshat has to make sense, and the simple pshat says that swords are an adornment, so they remain an adornment. So Rav Kahana says, that's interesting, I never knew. I learned the entire Shas by the time I was 18, and I never knew that you have to understand the simple pshat as well. I always thought something could be just a drush. The Gemara says, you see from here, that you should always learn first, and then afterwards figure out what the reason is. Okay, now the Gemara is going to expound further on that pasuk in Tehillim, and this will take us to a lengthy Agadata which discusses 4 different ways that Talmidei Chachamim can relate to each other, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewards them for each of them. So first of all, we just said the pasuk Hoidcha V'Hadarecha, the pasuk which immediately follows that says V'Hadarcha Tzlach Rechav Advar Emes V'Anav Tzedek V'Soyercha Neiros Yiminecha. Wonderful things about somebody who learns Torah. The Gemara will expound it one by one. First of all, V'Hadarcha, we translate that to mean V'Chadercha, you're sharpening, referring to Talmidei Chachamim who discuss and they sharpen each other's understanding with their conversations about Torah. What happens if they do that? This is the first behavior Talmidei Chachamim have to each other. They sharpen each other. About that it says, Tzlach Rechav, you'll be successful and you'll ride royally. This comes to show that you'll have greatness and influence. Now, that's only if you learn the Shema, like it says in the next words, Al Dvar Emes. It has to be that for the sake of truth. It's also not if you're going to be arrogant, because it says Va'an Tzedek, you have to be humble. If you have all those things, then you will have something else. You have Torah Neiros Yiminecha. The Torah will teach you. Your right hand will teach you awesome things. So, okay, wonderful. It will be the strength of your right hand. Now, the right hand, the Torah was given with the right hand. Okay. Now the Gemara has another pshat here in this right hand thing. The Gemara says that there's 2 ways of learning. It says, the long years and days is in the right hand, and wealth and honor is in the left hand. So how could that be? Just long days is in the right hand, not wealth and honor? So the Gemara says, no, the right hand has long days and wealth and honor. The left hand has only wealth and honor. What does this mean? The left hand and the right hand? The right hand means you learn a Torah like you do things with your right hand, carefully and precisely. Then you'll get length of days, wealth and honor. If you learn with the left hand, kind of sloppy and imprecisely, then you'll end up with just length of days, which is not bad. You'll end up, with just wealth and honor, not length of days. Also good, but not as great. So those are the 2 ways you should learn. You should learn as with your right hand, and that's what the previous pasuk means when it says Yiminecha. Okay, that's the first way Talmidei Chachamim relate to each other, through sharpening. The next way is when they are pleasant to each other. On that it says, Oz Nidbru Yirei Hashem. Nidbru means when they'll speak pleasantly to each other. Like it says, Yad Ba'amim Tachtenu. So if they'll speak pleasantly to each other, the rest of the pasuk says, Hashem is going to listen. So you see Hashem will listen closely when Talmidei Chachamim speak nicely to each other. Now, the rest of the pasuk says, Chosh means those who think his name. What does that mean, Chosh? So Gemara says that means that people who plan to do a mitzvah and they're prevented from doing it get reward as if they had actually did the mitzvah. Now the Gemara says on the subject of mitzvahs, Rav Chanina Bar Adi says Baridi says anybody who does a mitzvah the way it was said, meaning the way he's supposed to do it completely and wholesomely, then he will never get bad news. Like it says, Yeda Shemer mitzvah Yeda davar ra. Shemer, one who guards, keeps, watches, makes sure that he does the mitzvah properly, he won't hear bad news. Gemara says not only that, but even if a Kadosh Baruch Hu makes a terrible decree, he'll be able to annul the decree on his own, like it says, Basher Dvar Melech Shilton Mi Yomer Lo Ma Taseh. Kadosh Baruch Hu is king, who can tell him what to do? But right after that it says, Shemer mitzvah Yeda davar ra. Somebody who keeps a mitzvah won't know anything bad, meaning he could annul that particular decree. Okay, so next way in which Talmidei Chachamim might deal with each other is that they listen to each other. So on that it says, Hayesheves baganim chaverim makshivim lekoilech hashmiyenu, meaning when you listen in the gardens, you live in the gardens, and your chaverim listen, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will listen, and the divine presence, the Shekhinah, will not leave Klal Yisrael. Like it says, and if, however, they do not listen to each other, then they do cause the Shekhinah to leave Yisrael, like it says, Barach, Doidi, Udmei, that the deer will run away from Klal Yisrael. Okay, the fourth way in which Talmidei Chachamim might deal with each other is if they lift each other up, meaning like flags, they raise each other up, that they don't have a teacher, they try to find a teacher, and they learn whatever they could from a teacher, they did the best that they could, and now they together will learn together and reach greater conclusions on that. The Gemara says, if they lift each other up like flags, then I will love them with my love because of what they do with the flags. And that's only if they know something about the subject and they did as much as they can to try to find the teacher. Okay. Now, this last statement was Rav Abba in the name of Shimon ben Lakish. Now, the Gemara has a number of other Agadic statements not related that come from Rav Abba in the name of Shimon ben Lakish. First of all, what's the best way to give tzedakah? Tzedakah is good. Even better than that, give somebody a loan. It's not embarrassing for him. Even better than that, invest in his business or help him invest. Give him capital to invest. That's not even a loan. And that's the best thing. It's not embarrassing in the slightest. Next thing, if you have a Talmid Chacham who is bad midos and he takes revenge and he bears a grudge like a snake, stick to him anyway. You'll learn a lot from him. If you have a sweetie, but he is a fool, he doesn't know anything, keep away from him. You're going to get in trouble. Next thing is if a Kahana named Rav Shimon ben Lakish, or maybe Ravasi, or maybe Rabbi Abba named Rav Shimon ben Lakish, a dog. Should not keep a bad dog in your house, a wild dog, because it says, Lomas, Lamos, Miriyeyu Chassid, V'yiras Shakaya Azayv. Somebody who has Lamas. Lamas is Greek for a bad dog. Somebody has a Lamas, Miriyeyu Chassid, is keeping away kindness. What's going to happen is poor people will be afraid to come to your door, and then you won't be able to do chesed, so don't have a door. Similar incident, the Gemara says there was a guy who let a woman come to use his oven to bake in his house, and she was pregnant, and he had a dog. The dog barked, she miscarried, and the owner said, don't worry, the dog doesn't have teeth. I took out his teeth, I threw him away, I took out his claws. She said, Shkoyach, I'm very grateful you threw them away, but my gratitude for you is also thrown away because the baby has already been miscarried. Okay. Next thing that we see from him is that it says in a pasuk, Smach bacha b'yaldusecha, young man, be happy in your youth. Let your heart rejoice in your youth. Go follow your heart. Follow your eyes. That doesn't sound like us, but that's a machlokes who's speaking there. According to Rav Huna, that's the Yetzer Hara speaking, and then the next words are the Yetzer Tov. The next words are V'dak, Ya'akol Eli, Yaviyachal, Lekim HaMishpat. You should know that Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to judge you for all that. Rish Lakish says that no, that's not what's going on. The first part is not the Yetzer Hara. The first part is talking about Torah. You should follow your heart. You should learn what you like, and you should follow your understanding. Mitzvahs, you have to be careful and precise and know that Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to judge everything we do and everything we don't do. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah, in the second half of the Mishnah, had spoken about the biris and the kavalim. We want to know what these things are. So the Gemara says biris is an armband, and etz oda. The Gemara says it can't be because the armbands are not mekabel tuma, because the biris is not mekabel tuma, and an armband is mekabel tuma. How do you know? Rashi says it was listed among the things that the Jewish people captured from the Midianite army, and all those things had to be put in the mikvah, so it can't be an armband. So the Gemara says no. What Rav Yehuda actually meant to say was that it's like an armband for the leg. Rashi explains that they used to wear this strap around the leg. The women used to, in order to hold up their stockings, they shouldn't fall, and that's why you're allowed to wear it in the street on Shabbos, because they won't take them off, because then the stocking will fall. And also, it's not mekabel tumah because it doesn't serve the person. The person doesn't need it. It's there to serve the person's stocking. Any object which serves another object, that is not mekabel tumah. That's the rule. Okay, now the Gemara has a discussion about this, And the Gemara is not so sure what this thing is exactly. The Gemara says that Rav and Rav Huna were sitting in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah, and Rabbi Yirmiyah was falling asleep. So Rav and Rav Huna started discussing amongst themselves, and they were talking about this biris and this kvalim. So what's the difference between them? So Rav says the biris goes on one leg, and the kvalim goes on both legs. But hold a second, if it's meant to hold up the stocking, they should go on both legs. So the Gemara says that Rav Huna said, no, it's not what it is. They both go on both legs. The difference is that kvalim have a chain between the straps. The biris is just to hold up the socks, and they're not connected with a chain. Kvalim have a chain between them. So the Gemara says, why, if you put a chain on it, all of a sudden it becomes Mekabel Tumah. How does that make sense? And we understand why you're not allowed to walk out in the street, because they may take the chain off if it's fancy and show it to a friend. But why is it all of a sudden Mekabel Tumah? It doesn't become functional because you hang a chain on it. Somewhere says one shot, maybe because it makes noise when it rattles. And we have a rule we said earlier that anything which makes noise is Mekabel Tumah, like it says in the pasuk about captured objects from Midian called Davar Shayave Beisha. We have a drasha, Davar we read as Dibor, meaning anything which makes a sound. So Gemara says, nope, that's not correct. Anything which makes a sound is Mekabel Tumah. That means if its only function is that it makes a sound, like a bell, what does it do? It makes a sound. So that's enough of a function to make it Mekabel Tumah that it makes a sound. But a chain doesn't, its point of a chain is not to make a sound. Nobody goes out to buy a chain to make noise. You don't like the noise. So that can't make it functional. So what is it? So the Gemara says it has a different function. There was a family in Yerushalayim that the women took large strides, and the problem was that the girls would lose their basulim because of the large strides. The hymen would tear, and that was not good. So what they decided to do was to connect their biris, to connect the kvalim, to connect the bands that they had around the stockings with a chain. That would limit their strides from being too large. The Gemara says it worked, and their hymens no longer tore. And this is also functional because it serves the girl, it doesn't serve the stocking only. That's what the addition of the chain does. The Gemara says that Rav Yirmiyah, who was asleep listening to this whole thing, woke up and he said, yeah, that's right, that's what Rabbi Yechanan said. Okay, now the Gemara has a number of other halachas that Rabbi Yechanan said about Tumah. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he visited Pumbedisa, and he said, you know, Rabbi Yechanan said that there's a halacha which we know that a cloth is not Mekabel Tumah unless it's a minimum size, 3 by 3. It's not clear, 3 fingers by 3 fingers, or 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim, but it has to be a minimum of 3 by 3. So he says, Rav Yechanan says that's only if it's a piece of a bigger cloth, but if it's an item which was made on purpose to be small, to be less than that size, then it's Mekabel Tumah no matter what. And this is relevant if you wear something like a belt which is less than 3 fingers wide. Now that's going to be accepted. The problem is going to be Rav Dimi's proof. He says the proof is from the tzitz. The tzitz was less than 3 fingers wide. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? The tzitz wasn't cloth. The tzitz was a hammered strip of metal. We have a brisa that says it was a strip of hammered out gold, and it had words on it. It said Kodesh Hashem, Machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yosi and the Chachamim, whether or not the words were on the same line or one on top of the other. But one thing's clear, it was gold, it wasn't cloth. So Rav Dimi, who had by then traveled to Naharda, sent a message back to Bodo, sent a message back to Pumbedisa, you're right. The proof about the tzitz was not for cloth that's too small, that is Mekabel Tumah. The proof of the tzitz was for an ornament which is too small, that it is Mekabel Tumah, even though it's small. How do you know that cloth which is made to be small is Mekabel Tumah? That's from somewhere else. That's from the word oi, beged, extra word oi, that teaches me that it is Mekabel Tumah. Now the Gemara says, I actually have this halacha in a brisa, and the brisa says 4 halachas as follows. Number 1, any article of cloth is Mekabel Tumah if it's made to be that way. Any ornament is Mekabel Tumah even if it's small. Anything which is a mixture of cloth and ornament is Mekabel Tumah. And the last halacha, which we'll discuss at length in tomorrow's daf, is that a sackclothing made of goat's hair is more Mekabel Tumah than something made of other threads. Now, what is the source of this halacha? So of all these 4 halachas, well, only the first 3. The Gemara says, how do you know that cloth of any size from the word oi beged, like we said? How do you know that any size ornament from the tzitz? And how do you know that a combination of the 2? Because in the Parsha of Midian it says mikol kli, any device. Where it says, okay, that's good. That's enough for Thomas Mace, which is what was going on by the Midianites. It was a war, and there were dead corpses all over the place. But how do you know about Thomas Sheretz, where it touched a dead rodent? Where it says there's a connection between those 2, Thomas Mace and Thomas Sheretz. Both have the word kli, and that's the 2 are connected, and that's how you know those 2 halachos are true in both situations.